Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Tell Me More About podcast, where we talk about some things that have hit the cutting room floor, dig deeper into this weekend's sermon with our very own Pastor Whit George. So
Master Whit, you know.
Master Whit, yes.
That's my preferred title.
Is it? Mm-hmm. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm so excited. Pastor Whit.
Yeah, Pastor. That's actually even cooler.
That is very cool.
Master Pastor.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it now.
We'll lean into that in the future. Okay. We're looking at Genesis 42, 43, and 44.
Yes. You know, these are, I think, some of the best chapters of the story of Joseph. It's where, as I was saying in the sermon, this is where the kind of the tension lies, or the main tension lies. Like, this is the climax of the movie. It's the part you don't want to get up and go to the bathroom. The
details that you pull out of Scripture when you sit in it and you allow your mind and your imagination to go there, you start to see things that you didn't see before.
Yeah.
And it's just an encouraging way to approach Scripture.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah.
But we did talk about tests this weekend.
Yep.
And I think that it's interesting because when someone approaches a test, like if you're taking a test in school, you're not usually excited to take that test. But we talked about tests as far as like God giving them to us as opportunities, or what is the benefit of a test?
Oh, man. Well, yeah, I think, in some sense it's exactly what I preach. You do learn things about yourself. I think it's an opportunity to change. But maybe more than that, it's an opportunity to be formed, or you could even say forged. Tests are often scripturally, biblically likened to a fire. And there is something about passing through a fire that strengthens you. Of course, we see that in a kind of a tempering way, or through sort of a metallurgy lens. There's a purifying, that fire does, a hardening, a strengthening that fire can create. And when we walk through tests, I think it has the same kind of effect on us. We can become someone stronger on the other side of it. Who was it that I was talking to the other day that went through something? I cannot remember who it was, but they went through something where they faced death and lost someone. And it was interesting. Their comment was essentially, now that I've been through this, it's almost like, what can touch me? I no longer fear, anything. I've been through the worst and come out the other side. I'm, stronger than I thought I was, or, that's fascinating. I don't want that experience.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's some confidence, I think, that can only be gained by that experience.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting if you look at Joseph and the dreams that he has. And then on the other side of them, in the fulfillment of the dreams, he wouldn't have mapped it out that way.
No,
but
for sure.
Through that season, he became the kind of man that could be second in command in Egypt.
Yeah, and I think became the kind of man that could deal with his brothers in the way that he did. He doesn't take vengeance on them. He doesn't just line them up and have them executed, all well within his power to do, and he doesn't do it. You're talking about a guy, as you were saying earlier before we started recording, I think, that this was a man who was emotionally mature, but I think a lot of that comes through what he suffered, what he went through. And it's interesting, suffering and learning are kind of joined themes in Scripture. I think it says of Jesus, somewhere in Hebrews, we talked about this.
Yeah, Hebrews 5.
Okay, what's the verse?
That he learned obedience.
Yeah.
Through the things that he suffered.
Yeah, that's an uncomfortable verse.
It is uncomfortable, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's that's the idea that there are things that I think lessons that you pick up in your suffering and the things that you go through and the tests that you walk through. I can certainly say that that's been the case for me. There are things I learned in the difficult seasons of life that I walked through that I would not have, and I don't think could not have learned in the seasons that we're comfortable. That's the thing about tests is there's pressure, there's stress and all of that, but the pressure and the stress are what kind of force the I don't know, the parts of you that you don't know are there or are not formed. That's what kind of forges those things or forces those things to the surface. And now, yeah, you've become someone different. You learned something new. You've become, I don't know, the kind of person who could walk through something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think that partnership with Joseph that we see with God, and him entrusting, testing his brothers. God trusts Joseph with the covenant family. And the biblical narrative is going to progress because Joseph doesn't take matters into his own hands. And that says a lot about the man that he became.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. What would you say to somebody who keeps feeling like they're experiencing the same test over and over again?
Well, I mean, my initial reaction would be, it sounds like you've yet to learn whatever it is that you're trying to, whatever it is God's trying to teach you through all of this, or whatever it is that He needs you to change in, or grow in, or learn. Yeah, I mean, for me, the big question there would be awareness. Is there some area of self-awareness that I've yet to see? That might mean that I would need to sit down with a counselor or someone that could maybe help me see myself or see the situation through a different lens. If I keep going through the same thing, I mean, you have a problem once in your life, man, that's unfortunate. You have it twice, wow, that's unlucky. You have it 3 times, it's you.
Yeah, you're the common denominator.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me how many people don't see that. They're like, man, all these relationships keep failing. I wonder if there's a common denominator here. And maybe, and a lot of times what I find is people are either too afraid, perhaps of pain, or stubborn to sit down and really admit that. And man, that's a tough place to be. But if you're willing and you're in a spot where you can actually recognize, I keep dealing with the same problem. We keep going around the same mountain. It's probably time to sit down and take a real look inside and maybe have some help doing that, because that's probably a self-awareness issue. You need to kind of gain some self-awareness and say, and the other thing too is just, by the way, I went through the same test. I mean, how many times did my dad have to say, do you want to be here? Do you want to be here? And sometimes it's not just, you've not learned this lesson at all, but I think the Lord is often just driving it deeper. It's like, hey, let's just drive this point home again and again. I mean, with my kids, there are things that they need to learn that we teach them. You don't just teach them once. It's like you need to teach them multiple times so that they understand and really get it. So that could also be another way to look at it.
And hopefully every time you're experiencing that test, maybe if you're not just ignoring the fact that it's happening, you're realizing every time you come back around to it that you're experiencing growth.
Yeah, hopefully.
In that area.
Sure.
Yeah, hopefully that's the
hopefully.
case. You talked a lot about setting boundaries this weekend. What would you encourage somebody with who is struggling with setting boundaries, or they have a hard time with it because maybe they want to be viewed as nice? Yeah.
Nice is not a fruit of the Spirit. That's something to note. But kindness is. And so, I think one of the things that I didn't say in every one of the sermons, but it's worth noting, is that Joseph tests his brothers with tears. And so there's a softness to what he's doing. He weeps 3 times in chapters 42, 43, and 44. Actually 45, the beginning of 45. But there's an emotional softness to what he's doing. He's not coming at them in order to pay them back. Boundaries are not a payback. They're not about vengeance. It's not about, I'm angry, I'm going to get back at you, I'm going to set this boundary. It really, truly is a test, an opportunity. Your hope is that they'll pass the test. How many times, we talked about this privately, but we've seen, in fact, we've got stories, people we know and know well, let's just say men who have failed in their covenantal relationship to their spouse, pastors even, who when that happens, the church, as part of what we would call like a restoration plan, put to them a test. We're going to ask you to do this. We're going to ask you to stay out of ministry for so long. We're going to ask you to, whatever, have no contact with so-and-so. We're going to, whatever. And most of the time, I hate to say, when those types of things happen, the people that we're putting those sort of boundaries and tests to don't end up following through with them. They end up walking away. They end up saying, this is too hard. It's easier just to go down the street or go to another state where there's a different group of people that don't know your past and you can start all over again and whatever. But there are a couple people that have said, no, I'll walk through this. And it changes them, I think, profoundly. The boundaries given aren't necessarily, they're not a punishment for you did something wrong. Now I'm going to set some obstacles in front of you because I'm unhappy with you. No, they're tests. So I think that's important. Tests and boundaries aren't exactly the same thing, right? I think we could say that probably there's a little bit of a distinction in there, but I think they share enough similarities to warrant being discussed in the same kind of conversation. And so a boundary is essentially saying, hey, it's not, this is a line I'm going to ask you not to cross. Obviously, Henry Cloud's written a book about this. If you want to go deeper into all that, I would encourage you to dig into his resources, and we can link to that in the show notes. But what I would say to that, to someone like that, is I would say probably worth getting some counsel, especially when you're dealing with someone that maybe emotionally you've got a lot tied, if it's a parent or a son or a daughter, hard to be objective. Oh my goodness, it's hard to be objective. There's so many feelings you'll wrestle with of guilt, I'm being too hard. You'll waffle back and forth from feeling like I'm being overly generous to I'm being way too difficult here. Why am I being so obstinate, or why am I being so harsh? You'll feel all those emotions. And so having someone outside the situation that you can trust, wise counsel, could be a counselor, could be a pastor, maybe just a trusted friend who has could have an objective view of the whole thing without some of the emotions tied to it that you have, helps you kind of say and see and set boundaries that are reasonable both for you and for them.
Yeah.
So, and I think you just have to be willing to be seen as someone who's, you don't want to bow to the idol of niceness, of being seen as a nice person. I can, fall in that boat. Even as a parent, I don't want my kids to be unhappy with me. I don't want to deal with, or even the what would it be? I don't think expediency is the right word, but maybe just the ease, or maybe trying to avoid the discomfort of just dealing with the wrath of teenage kids.
Yeah,
and their
you're
bad
more
attitudes.
concerned about keeping the peace rather than like being a peacemaker, which is a little bit more of a process to go through.
Yeah, probably so.
And if you have if your identity is wrapped up in people liking you, then you're going to really struggle with setting boundaries.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, for sure. Or if you're just the kind of person that just doesn't like, conflict, it's just not, you just don't like the tension of conflict, or even, and this is one that you feel as a parent, especially as your kids get older, or even just the fatigue. If I ask him to do this, this is what's going to result. And I would rather not go through that. I'll just do it myself. And that's very real.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Sometimes setting the boundary is harder than doing it, like just doing it yourself, or enabling, or just living with the consequences of their broken. Like, honestly, sometimes in the short term, the boundary is harder. In fact, most often it's harder than it is just living with the dysfunction. That's an interesting thing. It's like, I'd rather just live with the dysfunction of this relationship. I'll just continue to do everything. I'll continue to overfunction.
Yeah.
I'm doing more than I should. Oh man, this is a real thing, and I'm bitter about it, or there's some resentment building up, but just easier to keep going with the overfunctioning than to go through the hassle of having an argument with you.
Yeah. Edwin Friedman calls that a failure of nerve.
Wow.
So you just kind of give up and you capitulate because change is costly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. I just think about the person who is always kind of lamenting, God, why are you testing me, or whatever. And it really personally bothers me. I'm like, don't stop thinking about God, why are you testing me? And think about walking through this season well.
That's it. I mean, there are principles that you can learn after the fact and go, oh, that was a test I needed to pass. But in the moment, like the stories that I tell about sitting down with my dad, or him asking me to consider leaving and, all of that stuff. I'm not in the moment going, this is a test. Mm-hmm. All right, this is a test. I'm going to need to pass this. What's the right decision? I don't think that way. You're following God. That's it. And then the other side of it, you go, oh man, God was testing me. That was a testing phase of my life. And I think you go through, I think anybody that's going to be led by God, that God is going to use in any significant way, and please don't hear that as having a ministry platform, but just God is going to use in the space that you're in, I think will go through a period of testing. I think that's just part of what it means to follow God. There's always that kind of maturation phase. What's his name? Who's the guy that wrote the book? I can never remember his name, The Making of a Leader.
Clinton.
Yeah, Robert Clinton.
Yeah.
Wrote a book about this and basically looked at all of these different leaders that had been both biblically and present day, and could identify similar seasons. And one of them is this, I forget what he calls it, but there's this testing season that goes on.
Yeah.
Where you're being formed and forged, and you're becoming the kind of person that God will then be able to use later on in a more, what he calls a kind of synergistic way. I think it's called like synergy or something like that, the next season of life, which is honestly where I feel like I'm just now getting to. And I'm 47 years old. Yeah. But it's like all that I've been through and everything that I've experienced is now starting to reap dividends. And so there's this kind of accumulation of experience and testing and knowledge and wisdom that gets formed in you over time. And then you hit this part where it's like, I think it's called convergence. That's it. Where it's like all of that comes together, and now you're really starting to be used by God in a more significant way. That's where I feel like, even personally, I'm at. But I think that's preceded by these years. So like a test is not just like a one time, although it can show up that way, but often it might be like a decade of your life. That's another way to think of it. It's just like, what are you going to do in this decade?
Right.
You're not, 20-something, person in your 20s, like you're not who you're going to be. What are you going to do? How will you use this decade? And here's what's interesting. To the extent that you use and maximize your time in your 20s probably has a lot to do with what you'll be doing in your 30s.
Yeah.
And maybe you might have to, like I did, have to kind of go through some of the same things again in your 30s because there were lessons you didn't learn in your 20s.
Yeah.
And I think even for some people, it's like maybe relationally, gosh, yeah. It's like you might be successful business-wise. You might know how to make money, but relationally, you're just still down here in the same cycle of whatever, like brokenness that you were in your late teen years, that you were in your 20s, that you've been in your 30s, and you might be 50 years old, and you might be going through the same, like you might have learned a great deal about business. You might have amassed quite a bit of success, but relationally, you're still stuck. And so so you keep walking through the same pattern again and again and again, and maybe you've been in like a 40-year period of testing.
Yeah.
I mean, that wouldn't be uncommon.
I would say that's Jacob in this situation for sure, because he has so much success. Like, he has all the stuff.
Right.
But
he's still pretty broken.
But he's still pretty broken to the point where he blames his sons for the things that have happened to him.
Well, it's really interesting to me, too. I was just looking at this morning, and it's somewhere in here when he's talking to, let me see, I think I underlined it. When they're talking about taking Benjamin back. Oh, yeah, right here. This is verse 38 of chapter 42. Notice how he talks about Benjamin. My son. Mm-hmm. He's the only one he talks to. His sons. He's talking to his sons. Yeah. My son shall not go down with you.
Yeah.
And for his brother is dead. It's like there's only two of them. In his mind, he's only got two sons. I've already lost my one son. I don't want to lose my other son. And listen to this. I mean, literally, he says, he is the only one left. As he's staring at 10 other sons. Mm-hmm. And so, Jacob is this guy that just keeps on. Like, he's still kind of stuck. What's interesting about this whole narrative is that Jacob's on his own journey, too. And he eventually has to sort of release Benjamin and say, okay, if I die, I die.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there is this sort of surrender that happens, to what degree he's changed.
He's in his own version of a test, really.
True.
Like, he has two direct...
Judah is, Joseph has been, Jacob has been. In fact, that was one way we were going to put the sermon together, was to frame it around, that was the original idea, was that the sermon would be Joseph, Judah, and Jacob, and kind of talk about each one. But it just ended up, it was going to be way too much material, and so I ended up changing it to... The testing motif. But anyway.
Yeah. But I love the way that Judah approaches Jacob. And I think that it unlocks something for Jacob in that moment to be what you would call in the presence of a compassionate witness. Like Judah is, I don't know, he's lost two of his own sons.
Yeah, he has, hasn't he? That happens in 38.
Yeah. And then there's this idea of sacrifice.
Well, he's also been humbled, right, by Tamar.
Yeah.
When he's like, she's more righteous than I am.
Yeah.
He's been through a lot by this point. So you're saying this idea of sacrifice. What were you saying there?
I think when he says, let the blame rest on me, to his father, interestingly, Reuben says, I'll kill my two sons if I don't bring Benjamin
Reuben
back.
is such a disaster, isn't he?
He really is.
He's this guy that's trying too hard. Have you ever been around people like that they want to, they can't rest in themselves? Reuben seems this guy who's just never quite comfortable in who he is. And so he's always having to reach outside of himself. And he's going too far with everything. You know, like he's gone too far with sleeping with his father's concubine. He's like this power play that seems terribly pathetic.
He's the oldest. He's the firstborn son. And so it's like he's always grasping for that. In some ways, I think.
Yeah, and you see him in the when the brothers want to kill Joseph, Reuben steps up and says, "Let's not kill him." But then no one really listens to him. And then Judah comes in and says, "Hey, how about we just sell him as a slave?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's a good idea."
Yeah. So it seems that Judah probably has some natural leadership in him.
Yeah, more influence, and Reuben doesn't seem to have it, and for whatever reason, we don't know. And then here, as you say, I mean, he offers this extreme reaction of, tell you what, if something happens to Benjamin, you can kill my sons, which is this, I think, sort of Jacob's response is essentially like, and what good is that going to do me? You know, killing your kid? No, what a terrible idea.
But Judah
it's like the Happy Gilmore answer at the end. Is that right? Is it? No, not Happy. Billy Madison. I don't know. Did you ever see the Adam Sandler movie Billy Madison?
But
where he
it's
has to
been
go
a
back to
long
school,
time.
and they put him on the. They put him in the game show at the end, and the guy asks him a question about business ethics, and he gives this terrible answer, and then the response of the game show guy is like, "That is the worst answer I've ever heard. At no point in your incoherent." Rambling, did anything that you said even come close to approximating a correct response? I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul. I think that's how Jacob responded to Reuben.
Incredible. was thinking about like this idea that Judah has kind of maybe some leadership qualities, but he doesn't have the character to sustain leadership. And we kind of see that come to the surface like earlier in the story. But now he's saying, let the blame be placed on me.
Right.
And he makes this promise to his father, but is he actually going to follow through with it?
Yeah. And he does.
And he
does. When it comes down to it, he's willing to make the tough choice, which is what I was talking about with the kind of cost of character, the idea of being refined, is that when you're going through a season of testing, there will always come a choice. And life is this way. You're going to hit different crossroads in life. And when I say season of testing, you may not even know you're in a season of testing. It may just feel like life to you. You may recognize that it was a test later on. But often tests, maybe always tests, include this sort of crossroads moment where you get to stand between a couple of choices and say, which way am I going to go? And sometimes that choice is really obviously moral. Let's say in Joseph with Potiphar's wife, yet the complications of the situation, or maybe the nuances of that situation, complicate the choice. As I was saying, I was really fascinated to kind of think through that thought experiment this weekend of how Joseph could easily have justified adultery with Potiphar's wife as a way of escaping.
Yeah, to preserve himself.
And in so many ways, I don't think we would blame him for it, because who would want to go to prison for years? And so, in extreme circumstances, it's interesting. I read a Bonhoeffer biography, and if you don't know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer is, he was a pastor, theologian in Germany during the Second World War. And there are so many, it's interesting how extreme situations create moral dilemmas that you just don't think about. The world seems so black and white until until pure evil like Hitler steps onto the stage, and it really does change. You really do find yourself in moral dilemmas. One of the things I thought was interesting about it, I'd never in my life considered, what about godly people who were living in Germany during the time of Hitler, who maybe didn't agree with his politics or his rhetoric, especially in the beginning, but maybe like Bonhoeffer's fiance's parent, dad and brother were part of the German military before Hitler comes to power. And now that he's in power, you have the question of whether or not you're going to fight. And then you have the question of, do I serve my country, though I disagree with what we're doing, or do I abstain? And if I abstain, they're going to kill my family. What do I then do? Oh man, I mean, the moral complexity of those types of things and trying to figure out where right and wrong is suddenly, it's not so easy anymore. And I think that's something of what Joseph is going through here with Potiphar's wife. It's like there's a moral complexity to this that seems so obvious on the surface. Oh yes, just don't, commit adultery with her. But when you think about what's at stake, where he's living, what he's living in, and even the point that my dad had made last week, that even the commandment to not commit adultery had yet not been given. Sinai is not going to come for 400 plus years.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, Joseph's got every excuse under the sun. And yet it's amazing. And he comes out with the right choice. He chooses the right thing. But that can often be what it's like in a period of testing, is that, the choices are complex and it's not always easy, but I don't know. When you're willing to make the right choice and choose what's right, and often making the choice that's going to cost you something. I think God can form in you and build in you something that He can use and will use in the future.
Yeah, it is very costly, and some people would have a hard time saying that it's worth it. to pay that cost. Because we're looking at things from a very natural standpoint. So for Joseph to say, it's worth it to pay the cost of going to prison when he doesn't see the end of the story.
Well, isn't it? Yeah, and it's interesting because the writer of Ecclesiastes makes that same argument. What's the point of all of this? Sure, there's wisdom, but at the end, we all die. In the end, the rich and poor die alike, so why not just go for it? And he's asking that question. That's the part about life and even the part about faith that's more complex than I think we often, sometimes Christian people want to admit, is that in cases of real suffering and real difficulty, people are wrestling with things that, if I can just be honest, I've not had to deal with. And so, in some instances, I think there may be some folks who are saying, I don't know if it's worth it. And I'm be like, yeah, in your situation, that's a real question.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a pat answer. And I don't think the Bible, I think even the existence of the book of Job or the book of Ecclesiastes are acknowledgments that, yes, life is messy in ways that, and that's what you got to love about the Bible, because it doesn't kind of flinch. It doesn't act like those things don't happen. It faces them like head on and asks the tough questions. Why?
Yeah.
What about it? Should I even continue?
It actually reminds me of a verse in 1 Peter.
Yeah.
1 Peter chapter 1, where Peter is talking to people who are going through trial and they're experiencing suffering. And he talks about this living hope in the resurrection of Jesus to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you. So it's something that we don't necessarily see, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed. This is amazing when you think about the points of the sermon. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you've been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, it does. Yeah. I read those verses, I think Sunday morning, actually, yesterday morning, before I preached. And I didn't spend a ton of time in them because I thought, well, sometimes you just kind of want to stay focused. But there is so much there that's like, it's the same ideas are right there. I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Things being revealed.
Yeah.
Being refined.
Yeah.
To the glory of God. Interesting.
Yeah. So there's a lot of really good stuff in this weekend.
Sure.
Really practical help around boundaries. I heard from a ton of people, and just talking about the nature of a test. So what would you say to the person right now who's maybe struggling in one of these areas? What's the practical next step for somebody who heard this weekend and is saying, okay, what do I do with all of this?
Oh, man. Well, so much of it depends on what they're dealing with. But, I think... one thing I would say is that trying to figure out whether or not you're in a test or not, I'm not sure is terribly helpful. But I do think doing the right thing with the decisions that you have in front of you and the season that you're in is, it's what we talked about a few weeks ago, embracing your season. You may, in fact, be in a testing season. You might be in a decade of being tested by God. Great. Embrace it. Make the right choices where you can. For those that are worrying about or wondering about what does it look like to set boundaries, I think it's good to get counsel there. It might be wise to read a book on boundaries. Like I mentioned before, Henry Cloud's got the book on boundaries. Get a little help doing that. I think having a counselor in your life to do that, especially if it's with someone that you love or someone close to you, like a family member that you're dealing with, especially just a long history of stuff. it's good to get outside perspective. Heather and I have done that where it's like, hey, thank you. This is okay. Because sometimes you just get so locked in your own path, in your own head, in your own situation that it can be hard to kind of see beyond it, and you need somebody to look at you and say, hey, here's a way you could, set a boundary with your son. Here's a way you could set a boundary with your dad. Here's a way you could talk to your mom or whatever. Or that's unhealthy. Have you ever thought about that's probably not something that they should be doing? Yeah, those are helpful conversations.
Let's say you're in a test right now. What can you do well? What can you do well in the space that you're in? What can you do with integrity in the space that you're in?
Well, I would say that being willing to do what is right, what the Lord is asking you to do, no matter what the cost, is the right answer in a test.
Yeah.
That kind of humble approach. Essentially, you're Jesus in the garden. Not my will, but your will. In fact, you may find yourself at a place where you're praying a similar prayer. Lord, is there another way? Any other way I can do this besides having that talk with my father?
Yeah.
Any other way I can do this besides sitting down with this counselor? I really don't want to do it. Any other way I can do this besides staying here and submitting in this role? I'd really like to move on, but sounds like you're telling me to stay. Any other way I can do this? Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. That's the right attitude to have in a test. It's okay to feel all the feelings. It's okay to wrestle with God. It's okay to step into the Garden of Gethsemane and sweat those drops of blood. It's okay to feel all those feelings. It's okay to bring other people into it. Hey, Peter and James and John in my life, come on over. Would you pray with me?
Yeah.
I am going through something, but at the end of the day, the right answer is always bow the knee, I'll go wherever you lead. And if you're willing to take that approach, you will always pass the test. You'll always make the right decision if you're willing to submit and say, all right, Lord, I'll follow wherever you're leading. That's the right approach to a test.
Yeah, that's so good.